All right. Happy Wednesday, everybody. It is Wednesday. We have a special episode of Learning Tech Talks today where we are continuing to explore the landscape of learning technology while cutting through the fluff and getting the questions answered you need answered to build out your digital ecosystem. So, this episode, I'm joined by Graham Hogg, and he is from C6, and we are going to have a really fun discussion around the topic of developing teams through simulation. So, as we're getting started here, feel free to like, share, tag in somebody who would benefit from the conversation, and also you can play along and participate because, again, the goal of this is to be interactive. But to get things started, comment in and share where you are in the world today. I'm in my usual space here in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Graham, how about you? Where are you today?
Hi, Christopher. I am in Connecticut, Westport, Connecticut. Very leafy and grey day this morning.
All right. It is the beautiful leaf season. I don't know, have they started, as the colors change, or are they starting to fall off yet?
They're starting to change and fall off, which means I'm going to have to get out in the backyard shortly to start collecting all of those leaves.
Are you a raker or are you a mower? Do you just chop them up and leave them, or do you actually clean them up?
I'm a raker. I haven't elevated to the leaf blower just yet.
That's the next level. That's the next level.
Yeah, indeed. I'll graduate next year, but I am a raker.
Okay,
I am a raker.
All right, and is it getting cold there? We had snow this week already. I wasn't too.
Yes, it's okay. I was out running this morning, and I was wearing a couple of layers. So yeah, it's a little bit chilly.
Okay, it's coming too early this year. It is coming too early this year. I'm not ready for winter yet. But anyway, indeed. Okay, so now. Question of the day this one kind of has something to do with what we're talking about. So you've had some time to prepare. You get to go first, but those of you watching, you can also play along. Since we're talking about simulations, I thought, hey, let's think back. Let's take a journey down memory lane. And Graham, what is something from your childhood that you wished you could have learned through a simulation but didn't?
Good question, Christopher. And it relates to gravity and a go-kart. So I remember building a go-kart with my neighbors and sitting on the top of a hill in the go-kart and volunteering to be the test dummy. Okay. And halfway down, one of the wheels fell off and I flipped over and over, broke a finger, scraped my head, etc., etc. So I wished I had tested a little bit more and iterated around the problem a little bit more rather than going full blown at the start.
Just jumping in and doing it. Now, okay, you built a go-kart. I have to ask, was this like legit go-kart here? Or was this, you just scrapped some things from your parents' shed and pulled it together, threw some wheels on it?
Yeah, it was actually my friend's parents' shed, but the latter. I don't think this would have won Formula One.
It was a race of any kind.
Yeah, it had four wheels, but only just. And yeah, my friend he lived on the top of a hill, so I don't know why we thought that was such a good idea. But my go-karting career sort of stopped there, Christopher.
That was the end of the go-karting.
Yeah.
Well, I wish. Yeah. I should have had you bring pictures because I am now very curious of what this is. I had a go-kart. Mine was one. It was given to me by a friend, but it was a former racing go-kart. But it had no brakes. And it had no throttle. So you would start the engine and it would just take off and you would jump into it. And the only way you could slow down was to whip donuts. It was probably not the safest. I actually had forgotten about that thing. Maybe simulation would have helped there. Anyway, mine with this one, okay, was I had trouble deciding between two. But I think the one I'll go with is I had a friend who was big. He had 2 trampolines, and he was convinced he wanted me to learn how to do backflips so that I could do backflips from one trampoline to the other. This is the kind of genius ideas that I feel like you have when you're in your early teenage years. And that was one that I cannot tell you how many bruises and sore ribs. Yikes. And I'm surprised I'm still here, to be honest with you. All these attempts at not only trying to learn a backflip, but to learn a backflip from one trampoline to the other. So I made it, but I certainly wouldn't have mind throwing on some sort of experience that hurt a lot less than it did.
Yeah, indeed. Very good.
Okay.
Good question,
Well,
Christopher, actually. Really good question.
right? I see
Yeah.
this. It's the fun part of this. We have some fun. We go back. It is related to what we're talking about to some degree. So let's shift gears into that. You're the CEO and founder of C6, which is all about digital simulations. But tell me a little bit about the background behind that. What made you say, you know what, I'm going to do? Did you know you wanted to get into learning technology? Was that something that you strived for, or how did you get there?
So the passion, the interest started with teams and team dynamics. I started off my career in the British Commandos, the British Royal Marines, and I led and was part of teams during that career. And simulation was something that we did, and we'll
Okay.
talk more about that, no doubt. But then leaving the military, I really sort of wanted to explore it in the commercial setting, and then started a career in L&D. And from a technology perspective, this was over a decade ago. There really wasn't much there from a
That's
technology
true.
perspective. Yeah, so lots of great content, great thinking, great work, but very little in terms of technology experiences that teams can go through. So that's where it all started, really.
Okay. Got it. And then this started, how long ago was that you started? Because again, yeah, the tech has come a long ways.
Yeah, I entered this sort of L&D arena just over 10 years ago, and joined a fantastic team of L&D professionals, super smart. And I remember being really impressed with their quality of thinking, their experiences, the diversity of the group. But their positioning with the business, I thought, was really sort of interesting. They're very much focused on sort of producing content and being a sort of middle person between content providers and the business, and not really engaging with business teams and unpacking business team issues. That was at a large oil and gas company, and then I went to a similar role in financial services and saw the same. So very quickly, over 6 years, saw this kind of challenge that L&D professionals had in engaging with the business and engaging with teams, and that inspired me to leave the sanctuary of the
Say, you know
corporate
what, I'm
world.
going to go solve for this. I see a gap, and
Yeah,
I'm going to go tackle it. It's an
yeah,
interesting
exactly.
point you bring up, and I think it's an important one. That two things that you've mentioned that they're fair points, right? You look at where we were 10 years ago, what we had the capability to do, and I talk about this a lot. What we had the capability to do is vastly different than what we have the capability to do today. And I
Yeah,
think that's one of the things that sometimes you see this in the space where there's a lot of finger pointing and beating each other up about, well, this is, how things were done. And in a lot of ways it was, well, that's what we had to do. I think where we have opportunity now is things have dramatically changed, and the canvas is different. The paints are different than what we can paint with. And
yeah,
so it's about actually shifting that thinking and that capability to say, okay, how do we paint in this new world? And then the other thing that I'm curious about, I'd really like to get your perspective on this, because when I hear simulation, it's similar to when I hear people say experience. It can mean a very different thing depending on who you're talking to. A simulation can be as basic as, hey, here's a little situation, and then answer these questions based on what you think the response to that could be tagged as a simulation, all the way out to, we're actually running you through this is a real business problem. It's a faux business problem, but it's one we're working through to solve a challenge. Where do you sit, as you talk about C6, where are you on that spectrum of simulation, and how do you define it?
yeah. We're very much on the side of team experience. So throwing team into a performance challenge, and it might be space exploration or motorsport or running a business, but an unfamiliar challenge where they're faced with lots of data to handle and team dynamics to grapple with, and they're out of their comfort zone, Christopher, right? So that they're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, and that is really the sort of one of the central tenets to the experience for us. It's unfamiliar, and as you go through those phases of that experience, what's really important is we start to surface default behaviors in teams. Sometimes,
The team
it's not about,
dynamics that start, the
yeah,
team
yeah,
dynamics start eking out.
exactly, exactly. You can pretend for 20 minutes or so, but as the pressure comes on, as layers of the scenario come on, then those default behaviors really, really come through. And that's where we want to get to. That's where you achieve that awareness and motivation in teams, and then you're into you've crossed the start line. So it's and I took that from my military career, actually, principles of it, which is getting teams together with multiple skill sets, and throwing them into a challenge and seeing how they interact. The military, Christopher, are very good at that. We take experts from all around the organization, signals experts, um, intelligence experts, infantry experts, engineers. We bring them together in simulation, and then we see how they work together against a common challenge. How good are we at leveraging each other's skill sets and perspectives to overcome this challenge?
So
And
on that,
we didn't really see that
well,
in
yeah,
business.
and so I'm going to back up a little bit because you brought this up about, and I won't go too academic here, but when you talk about the pushing people into that right threshold of stress, I think that's a really important factor to consider with this when you think about simulations, because sometimes it's easy to move in this zone of, well, we want everybody to pass, or we want everybody to be able to get through it. And
Yeah,
that goes against what we know is the zone of proximal development, which is
exactly.
you have to push people to the right level where it's not easy, because if it's too easy, they aren't actually
Exactly.
developing and growing. Now, granted, you have to, I think this is where the military, you can't necessarily bring the military into corporate sometimes, because pushing too far in a corporate environment can actually have negative consequences. So it is about finding that right balance. So how do you focus on that as you bring people together to find what is that right degree of complexity?
So I agree. When I was at in my first L&D role, I came across simulations that were a little bit contrived in that everybody's a winner. You go through an experience, it might be half a day or a day, and everybody's a winner, and you're racing against a computer or a machine, and the facilitator manipulates it in a way that there's a sort of positive result, and everyone
Yeah,
high
it's one of
fives,
the
and then
big pieces of feedback, and I think it's why sometimes people are hesitant on simulations, because many of
I
us
agree.
have that reaction because that's what we've experienced in the past.
Absolutely. We at C6, we put a flag in the ground here, Christopher, actually. We've said that's not what we want to do. There's some great businesses out there and companies that do that, but that's not what we're about. We want it to be competitive. We want it to be, there's certainly be sort of a performance challenge in there, explore those team dynamics. We can go into this in this conversation.
Yeah.
And at the end, there's some real insight from those teams as to how they've behaved, whether you came first or whether you came last. There's some meaningful insights. And Christopher, from my experience of doing this now for over 10 years, there are serious engagement wins there, serious
From the
participation wins.
participants.
Yeah, because as you're going through the sim, if you are giving performance feedback throughout, in other words, this team is in the lead and this team is here and everyone in between, then you can instill a sense of competition, and fun, and that sort of team building element. And I think that's really important, certainly in the virtual setting, because if you can create that fun and that sense of, high fives and competitiveness as you're going through, then a 2 or 3 hour simulation can absolutely race past.
Can
And
actually, right? Well, and I think what's funny about that is, it's an important point to bring up, is that continuous feedback that has to be incorporated. And again, I think a
yeah,
lot of the things we've talked about when we first started chatting about this was the fact there are a lot of principles that, whether you're talking about team simulations or not, that we can really apply back to anything we're doing. And that continuous feedback loop of letting people know how they're progressing, how are they doing, that is an important element, because there's nothing worse than doing something and then getting to the end and going, well, you didn't make it. and you really had no indicator. And we know this from performance management. We know this from all areas of things, but that component is absolutely critical. So that it sounds like that's an intentional factor that's been built into the simulations.
Yeah, absolutely. And with modern technology, you can do loads of cool things by asking participants to interact with the technology and do things throughout the narrative of the simulation. So, for example, there might be a preparation phase of the simulation where everybody's in a virtual setting, and you might ask them to press a button, and it might be the race ready button, or it might be the launch button. And what you can do is you can say to participants, we want you to press that button when you feel that you are ready to go as a team.
Okay.
And if you ask everyone to do that and you timestamp it and then play it back to teams, you can see gaps in where individuals press that button. And that's actually alignment feedback. So you can say, yeah, we're all super aligned, but actually, Chris, between you and I, there's a 3-minute gap as to when we felt that we were ready. So all sorts of little features that you can integrate.
These little nuances that could easily be overlooked.
Correct, exactly.
And intentional at it. Okay.
Yeah, and it's giving that data feedback to participants, which is a massive, as I say, sort of engagement and participation win.
Okay. So let's walk through this, because I want to get a better feel for what this looks like and maybe lay it out for people who are watching. Let's do twofold. I'm going to go through the experience itself. Walk me through as a participant, how this experience would work. And then I'm actually really curious on the design side, because going back to your point about performance consulting and actually working with the business, because you have to design a simulation that fits that right balance of it's authentic enough without getting so hung up on making it perfect. And I'm curious your thoughts on that. So before we get into that, though, how you're bringing these teams together? Are these teams of, because we talked about this before, one of the challenges I see with a lot of things when it comes to development is we're developing the individual, right?
Yeah.
A lot of things are focused on developing the individual. Unfortunately, and again, this isn't necessarily, you shouldn't do that, but we over-index on that individual development. And the reality is, in organizations we do work as teams. There's almost nothing that you think of that you do just completely by yourself. So as people are coming into this, are they developing, how are these teams forming? Are they one group? Like, how does that decided?
So it can be any group of people, really. It can be new joiners. It can be an intact team. It can be a leadership team, a globally distributed leadership team. But what you have to do is you have to put them into a virtual performance challenge. So you have to put them into a team, for example, in an endurance motor race, or sailing around the world, or putting somebody on Mars. And you have to give them that performance challenge and get them to work virtually inside the simulation. And then you bring them in and out of that simulation as you go through the experience in, for example, Zoom and Zoom breakouts, to have debrief discussions, what's working well, what can we improve, and then go back in. So for example, you could get a team of 18 people and you would break them up into 3 teams of 6. And all of those 3 teams are racing or competing against each other. Could be sailing around the world or space exploration, but let's give an example of a motorsport race. You're the Panthers team, the Bears team, or the Sharks team. Then what you do is you start
your animal choices.
You start to curate. Trust me, it makes it easier. Within each team, you give the same amount of resources. They all have an AI to interact with. They all have a sort of regulatory brief to manage. But that team is broken up into different component parts. Let's say driver performance, who are responsible for the drivers. Race control, who are responsible for weather data.
So they have roles. They have distinct roles in the
distinct simulation. Roles, exactly. And then you put them into this virtual setting where for 10 or 15 minutes individually, they have to prepare for the race. They can talk to each other inside the simulation. But that's all about how are you aligning virtually? And this is really difficult. It's an unfamiliar scenario. They've got lots of data sets that they need to play with. But inside that race team or that space travel team, how are we actually, figuring out the problem just using a team chat? How are we identifying Christopher, what information do you have available to you? What do I have,
get a
etc.
brief. So they get a little brief on their own, their kind of individual brief, letting them know their role, what they have,
Exactly.
the data they have, and then they go into this is some sort of digital environment. Yes.
Exactly. And that brief and the videos and everything is all inside the platform. And then you take them out and you then get them off into a facilitated discussion. Okay, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? What are the roles and responsibilities? What are the KPIs? And you show the team how disconnected they are, how unaligned they are, where those cognitive gaps, where those alignment gaps exist. You then give them the opportunity to have that conversation, so they're feeling a little bit more excited and motivated about going into the next session. And then you throw them into session 1, for example. And in session 1, you might give them AI. But what you have to do, Christopher, is you have to force that team to make decisions inside that simulation. You have to force them to decide on strategy, weather, changing tires, etc. The good, the bad, and the ugly. 15 minutes, you bring them out, and you give them some performance feedback. Congratulations, this team's in the lead. A little bit of a continuous improvement conversation, and then you repeat. So it's a slight sort of nod to
repeating the same. I guess, are they repeating the same simulation based on that, or is it just they're taking the next step, but now they're taking what they learned from the previous step, and now they're saying, now we're going forward, we're going to try and learn from what we did and not repeat our same mistakes.
Correct. Yeah. So within one simulation, that will last, for example, 3 hours. As they go through those sessions, they're progressing, they're improving the way that they align, share, think critically, challenge assumptions or whatever. And then, 6 weeks later, they might do, this is where you can look at sort of interesting things like neural scaffolding, learning scaffolding. At the end of you're raising awareness and motivation at the start, you're putting them through some modules of content, and then there can be a sort of test exercise, a capstone event for that team. But L&D teams building a culture of these experiences, where they're putting teams through experiences at different stages of the learning journey to really drive that engagement, drive that participation.
Okay. So it's interesting you bring this up, because as I think about this, in many ways, as you look at how work is being done, it's very similar to this, right? People are coming together, they're being pulled together, they have distinct roles. Sometimes that's not all very clear. And then they have to work through these challenges, and they're continuing to move forward with it. So one of the things I'm really curious about as you've seen this is, how did that shift? Danielle brought this up about the fact that it's been interesting watching teams interact virtually as things have shifted. I'm curious, how have organizations really, because to me this would bring out, and this is probably the scary part to some degree for teams, you start to see your team dynamics objectively in the mirror, and sometimes what you see may not necessarily be that pretty. And I think when we go back to when things were pre-COVID, there were a lot of things we just took for granted because, well, everybody's here and we're making a lot of assumptions about, we understand how we work, we understand how we communicate, we're in a pretty good spot, when really it may not have been. Now suddenly, boom, you're not together anymore. I have to imagine you've seen kind of an evolution of team dynamics.
Absolutely. Inclusion, for example, is becoming a critically important topic of discussion. As a leader, how good are you at capturing different perspectives? That is really difficult on Zoom calls and things like that. Effective collaboration, and I'm not just talking about discussing a PowerPoint slide, but actually running a key assumptions check, or outside-in thinking. Christopher, a game changer for me is the technology that's now available to teams. So things like Miro, Mural, virtual whiteboard collaboration tools, even file sharing tools like Dropbox. And it's all about the integration, right? So Zoom now making this big play through zaps, they're called,
Oh yeah,
zaps
Zapier
integrated.
that allows the quick transfer of the data
Yeah,
between the
exactly.
platforms.
So what we're seeing L&D teams do now is using simulation as an opportunity to practice using those tools, in anger. So halfway through a simulation, we're just going to take a tactical pause and we're going to go into Miro and we're going to do some assumptions mapping. As a team, what do we think is in terms of on a 2x2, risk and importance, for example. So teams doing that, and what we hear all the time is teams, the thought is worse than the doing. If you ask them to practice using a tool like that in a simulation, they go, wow, actually, that was quite easy. Yeah. It really improved the quality of our thinking and the questions that we asked. I want to use that on our blue bottle
there's purpose behind it. I think that's one of the biggest things. A lot of times we hand people these tools and we say, hey, go use this.
Exactly.
But there's not necessarily a use case or an opportunity to see what good looks like or how you do that. So if I'm hearing you correctly, as people are engaging with these simulations, they're also using as an opportunity for adoption for some of the technology that they're using 100%. In the organization to say, hey, we have these tools available. Let's use this alongside the simulation as an opportunity to practice some of this so that you have a better understanding of how to use it with actual work that you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. And this is why I think this Learning Tech Talks is so timely, because not just because of COVID, but I think it gives.
I did get lucky with the timing, though.
Yeah. This for me is a really important point. I sense that L&D right now is feeling a bit powerless.
Yes.
And the discussion that we're having, I think it gives L&D professionals the opportunity to meet teams where they are. Go and performance consult with teams through simulation and all the other tools that we've just sort of alluded to. That's how you get a seat at the table, L&D. The way that you get a seat at the table is by earning it. And you've got to engage with the business. You've got to show them what you can do. And I see so many L&D teams who are so smart, but are just in this sort of middle person trap between content and an LMS or an LXP. Now, there's some of that is really relevant.
They have their place, right?
Absolutely. But I think the technology that's available now presents a huge opportunity for L&D to become to empower themselves a little bit more. I was watching
that point. I think it is an absolutely important point. It's part of the reason I get so excited about the technology is that so many of the things, going back to what I said at the beginning of the show, that we've wanted to do, but we've struggled because we didn't have the capability or the capacity to do it. It just wasn't there. It wasn't necessarily we were bad or we were thinking wrongly about it. It was just our capacity or capability wasn't there. And now what this technology is doing is it's actually accelerating and enabling us to do things. I think where we get stuck sometimes is it can feel like unfamiliar territory. It can feel a little bit uncomfortable because we've gotten comfortable with how we've been doing things. And this does require, in some regards, a reinvention of what our role is, which I just talked about this last week. It can feel like a threat to your identity. That's not who I am. I made this, or this is how we have operated. Well, not anymore, but that doesn't mean you're any less valuable if you break down those skills. And I think that's a huge part of what you're talking about is as you do this simulation type stuff, it's an opportunity, one, to build credibility with the business because you're meeting them where you are. But I think going back to something else that's a huge opportunity for us is it gives us an opportunity to have a better pulse on what's going on in the business so that we can make proactive strategic decisions, so we can come to the table with suggestions and ideas and say, this is what we're seeing. These are the gaps we're seeing in the organization. And we can do it with actual data because the technology is now informing us on real things. It's not gut feels. It's not people liked it or I felt this was valuable. No, we can actually say even your start button, ready button example.
Yeah, we
team dynamics And we've got some disconnects here in these teams. Some people are very much ready to go, others are not, that we can actually action against.
Yeah, we have a member of our product team who just looks at that data exhaust from these experiences. You know, what data comes out of these simulations and these interactions, and it's real. It's not sort of forget Kirkpatrick. This is real data that you're seeing in these interactions. But your point about L&D, I think, is so poignant, Christopher. I really do. I was watching a movie with my daughter last week, and it was I can't remember. It's like a Disney movie or something. But someone said, you know, there are two paths that you can choose in life: the path that you choose yourself, or the path that someone chooses for you. And I think this is relevant for L&D, because you can sit there and say, this is really tough because, you know, it's a tough budgetary environment. How are we engaging with the business because everyone's virtual? I think it's a huge opportunity if they grab the ball and start running with it. And it's technology has such a critical part to play in that.
It does. It's a massive contributor to it. And I think this is why I get so excited about this from a inspiration standpoint. I just see so many things over the years that we've said, we want to do this, we want to be here, we want to have this capability. And now what tech is doing is saying, here you go. Here's your opportunity to do it. Where the accountability falls on us is to say, are you going to take that opportunity? Are you going to do something with it? Or are you going to say, no, thanks, right? That's uncomfortable for me.
Yeah. And when I was working in a group L&D role for a financial services organization, a global one back in the UK, I just remember having this very awkward meeting with a lot of vendors. And none of the vendors that we were working with were technologists.
Okay.
They were experts in the content. They were experts in D&I or emotional intelligence or, you know, team working, all of that stuff. But none of them really brought anything to the table from a technology perspective. And I think that's a flag that you need to wave if you're an L&D professional watching this. Are the vendors that you're working with able to actually talk confidently about technology? And that's not just running programs through Zoom and PowerPoint presentations. How confident are they at bringing all of these tools to bear in the way that they're engaging with the teams inside your business? Because if you're not getting that from them, if they're not thinking about technology in a modern way, then you might have to review that.
Yeah. Well, and it's a bit of an interesting situation to be in right now. And that was one of the things that was interesting when I started learning Tech Talks was this whole, I mean, there were some people who were very skeptical about why would you create a live stream where you talk to vendors on a regular basis? And I've actually found it to be tremendously valuable. I did it before I started learning Tech Talks, but to broadcast that, because similar to team dynamics, what we're talking about in team simulations, there is a distinct role on both sides and we have to work together. And that's the only way we move forward with this. And that's where I, again, see that as an opportunity to say, you need to find the right partners, because the reality is you cannot build that internal capability yourself. It actually doesn't make sense to. It really doesn't make sense to. I've been in situations where we've tried to build everything from the inside. It's just not the best use of time and resources. And I think that's where there's this opportunity to bring this together. One thing I actually am curious on, though, as we talk about these simulations, because this can be, I've been in heated debates on both sides of this, and I tend to be somewhere in the middle, maybe. I guess it depends. And again, for me, it's more, what are you trying to achieve? Then we'll go back. But on the simulation thing, when people do simulations, and I see this happen a lot, you'll see polar ends of the spectrum. Sometimes people want something that's just completely outside the scope of anything that you can't relate to. It's a completely different topic. If you're in, I don't know, healthcare, the simulations on sailing around the world, making it completely disconnected. Others have a perspective that when you do simulations, it has to feel so authentic. It feels as though it's exactly the kind of work you do. And again, my understanding from what you've talked about is you can go on either end of the spectrum, but have you seen, as you've been doing simulations, is there a sweet spot along that spectrum, or is it situational?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really great question, Christopher. We have a view on this. I've designed energy simulations for energy companies and beer simulations for beer companies. And it's tough because you're dealing with experts, right? The participants are experts. Now, unless you ask a professor at INSEAD to design a simulation for you that is high fidelity and really expensive and will take 6 months to build, you're not going to get the required sort of impact. Well, the way that we look at it is do a mission to Mars sim or sailing around the world or seeing around corners, and make it fun and engaging, but make it fun, because in a virtual world, that's really important. You need to get people excited and enjoy the idea of we're racing to Mars, or we're going to run a hotel for a month over the next three hours. So that's really important. But from a customization perspective, you can be really smart here. So, for example, pharmaceuticals sales teams, and a product launch, really big deal for L&D teams supporting sales organizations in pharma.
Got it.
We would have design simulations like space exploration, which replicates this idea of teams coming together, working through problems, working through a highly regulated environment, and then there's an event. And that event is a space rocket launch or a product launch. Same in financial services. That event might be CCAR, might be a regulatory event, but to the Fed. If you're in, for example, automotive, and you're faced with a really fast-moving customer environment, rapidly changing expectations of customers because of what Tesla have done. As you know, when you go into a dealership, customer expectations have been reset because of what Tesla's doing. So if you're Toyota, for example, or any other sort of automotive dealer, you want a simulation that replicates teams responding to and adapting to changing customer expectations. So then we would design a simulation based around running a hotel, where you've got changing customer expectations. So you want to make it fun and engaging. You want to take people away from the subject matter, but you also want to sort of bring some relevance and gamification or metaphor to what they experience in the real world.
That's actually really helpful. And so it very much aligns with the way I've approached simulations. And just to break it down from a little bit of a different angle that you hit on that I think is really important with this is going on the index of where you're trying to perfectly recreate the exact work environment. You think about it from the iron triangle standpoint, where it's, well, do you have unlimited budget, unlimited resources? Do you have the subject matter expertise to do that? But even if you could, I think the point that you bring up about the element of fun, which, by the way, I think we could use a lot more fun in the work that we do. We could bring a lot more fun to this stuff, is the fact that that's not exciting and engaging necessarily for a participant to go, hey, guess what? You're going to go do this digital sim, and it's kind of like work.
It's supply chain. Yeah, I know you work in supply chain. We're going to do supply chain.
That is not something that gets me excited to go, you know what? I cannot wait to go do fake work. I really want to go do fake work and practice work, but not actually get any real work done. That sounds terrible. That does not sound
that's
fun.
Hilarious. Yes,
and
absolutely
I think
right.
that is the point that you're bringing. And the point that we're getting to with this is, if you're thinking about simulation, if you're thinking about anything, you have to think about, what are we trying to accomplish with this? And I think where sometimes I see this not go far enough, and you talked about this, and it sounds like this is part of that architecture of the sim, not just what is the end outcome, but what are the behaviors that we're trying to see that lead to that?
Yeah.
So that we know whether people are on trajectory to do that. And if you can break through that, that to me is sometimes a glass box that we sometimes struggle to do, is break through that glass box and say, all right, what are the behaviors? Let's not get hung up on is it the right automotive? Is it the right, forget that.
Yeah.
In that environment, what are the behaviors we know we want to see in people? Then let's break it down to those most fundamental elements. Let's design around that. And then let's add in a layer of fun so that it is something interesting, but it's still relevant. Because if you go way too serious, not only is it like, really, I don't want to go do fake work, pretend work, but that's where you get the people that go, well, this isn't quite how my day would do it, or this isn't exactly the situation that I've been in. You almost need that suspended disbelief to break people away from, it isn't your work. It's different, but we're still watching and we're growing and developing the behaviors that we want to see.
That is exactly right, Christopher. And there's a really important point here. It's the last thing that you just said, and it's around utilization of the assets. So all the people that we work with ask the right question, which is, how far can I sweat this across my organization? So it can't be too much of a highly curated, high fidelity event, like a lot of simulations of the sort of 90s and early 2000s. The modality of it needs to be a lot more flexible. So you can use a simulation for a leadership team. You can use them for an intact team. You can use it for new joiners. You can use it as a sort of part of a transition program. So if you're clever, you'll design something that you can use again and again and again and again across teams inside your organization. And some simulations out there are, because of their DNA, it's difficult to do that.
Okay.
So commercially, there's a really important point there.
Well, and that again goes back to the point of, why do you want to take the time? Sometimes people feel like we just need to move fast, so let's just recreate what's out there. And it's, well, no, the point of breaking it down and understanding the behaviors you're trying to drive is so that we can create a simulation that's unique enough, while at the same time fundamentally similar, so we can scale and grow that out and push that. Which leads me to my next question, which I'm really curious about. How you talked about some of the use cases where people are pulling these things into place. But I'm curious, when an organization participates in this or they engage with you, how are they doing that? Are they coming with a specific target audience and a problem and saying, we've got this group of people, this is an area of opportunity? Or how does that interaction usually kick off?
Well, right now, lots of people are coming to us with a team engagement challenge.
Okay.
Lots, and that's keeping us busy. But
there's no shortage of that.
Yeah, there is also this is an interesting use case. So, an airline in the UK were at the start of a transformation, and that transformation had a narrative, and it was, we want to become the world's most data-driven airline. Okay. And what the organization wanted to do is get right into the heart of leadership and get them to internalize that a little bit and have a conversation about that and understand what that actually means.
Okay.
So we use simulation to help do that. And basically it was about data-driven decision making, asking the right questions and tying that to the way that we make decisions. So that's one use case. Another one is bringing new joiners into the organization. And there are two things that they wanted to achieve around who we are and how we work. Who we are from a values and behaviors perspective, and how we work from a D&I and performance management perspective.
Got it.
And again, we use simulation for that, just to have that conversation. 2-day virtual program, just half of it was a simulation. Okay. But like, Christopher, when you go into Home Depot, someone comes up to you in an orange apron and they say, what do you need? And you say, I need a shower. And then the second question they ask is, how much help do you need? Right?
Yep.
So for us, they say, what do you need? We need, a simulation for new joiners, high performing teams, executive leadership, whatever. And we have those simulations to bear. or they might say, we want to build our own.
Okay.
Okay, how much help do you need? And then we go from there, because we've designed our technology in a way that configuration and customization and all of that stuff is super easy.
Okay. Okay. So either way, either end of the spectrum, whether it's they've already got it figured out and they know specifically what they want to do, or they may say, listen, we've got some challenges we need to figure out. We haven't necessarily gone through and figured out what that actually looks like. You can work on either end of the spectrum, and you have some of these simulations, if you will, pre-built, but there's also the capability to customize around unique needs and challenges.
Yeah, correct. I mean, my C6 is, we're a product organization. We often go to market through consulting partners. So if there's a lot of delivery, we don't deliver tens of simulations a month, but we normally give that to a delivery partner who does that.
Okay. So then the other piece, and I think this is interesting, because again, going back to one of the things I'm very not sensitive to, but very aware of, right? I have a high level of empathy for this, is the fact that sometimes what leads people in our industry to not move forward is the fear factor. Going back to this, I might not have this quite figured out yet. I might not have the answer, and I don't necessarily want to have the vulnerability to say, I don't have the answer and I need some help. But I think one of the things that was interesting about what you said, I actually pointed this out when I did my 12-month live stream talking about the trends I've seen over the last 12 months. I brought up the fact that one area that I still see as an opportunity from the solutions that are out there, and it sounds like you're doing some of this with things, is providing insights on some of this data. Boss brought up the point earlier that there is a huge opportunity for people in our industry to up our technical acumen. Do we need to become coders? No. But do we need to understand technology, understand what's possible, understand how this stuff works?
Exactly.
Yes, we absolutely do. We're past the point of saying, I don't care for tech. Well, too bad. It's so sad. It's just the cost of entry now.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things you brought up that you mentioned when you talk about some of these insights is a lot of solutions I see, they give the data, right? They just give the data and say, hey, here's what happened. It took 3 minutes for somebody to hit the launch button. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's where there's opportunity, and it sounds like this is something that you're doing with that, is to have that solution also give you some insights on that data.
Yes.
You may be handing that to someone who says, okay, three minutes sounds good. I don't necessarily know what to do with that, versus instead of just giving the raw data and saying, here, you figure out what that means, having the opportunity to say, here's the data that came out of this. We actually, having done a lot of this, actually can share with you some key insights that you may want to action against based on the performance of that. And it sounds like that's part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It sits within a wider program of work, for sure.
Okay. So then I am curious, because with any of these things, as you think about it, there's always challenges. There's landmines, in front of you. You're sometimes walking a minefield, especially if you're trying to drive transformation and this isn't something you historically have done. I've got my perspective on just knowing and having gone through some of these things before, the landmines I've typically seen. But are there specific things that if people are looking at saying, we really should take simulations more seriously, or maybe we figure out a way to, again, going back to our earlier conversation, this is not about replacing everything that you're doing. We're not just shifting boxes and saying, stop doing everything you were doing, now just only do simulations. No, it's about saying we can augment our portfolio and say, we have this stuff where we have opportunities, is to take it to the next level, to build our business partnerships and say, hey, simulations. But people who are considering making that journey, what are some of the things you typically see that they run into where they go, I wish we had thought of this, or I wish this is something, or a challenge that, hey, you're going to run into challenges. I used to have hair. I don't anymore. And that's fine. But it's just because it's hard work. But what are some of those things so people can be prepared? Because sometimes that's the biggest piece, is just knowing what you're in for.
Yeah. So a few things, and a really great question, Christopher. So first is be agile in the way that you approach these things. Test. Take, you can beta test elements, pilot test elements with different parts of the business. and we love working that way, building features and elements that are right for the business and relevant for those teams. But I think you're talking about the how. So how would we create a culture of simulation, a culture of virtual experience delivery for our teams? And there's you've got to do this think about this in a modern way. So not giving it's all about sort of train the trainer and transferring capability so that you can deliver this in-house yourselves. And we've been kind of taken aback by how many of our customers are actually doing that now. Okay. Maybe necessity is the fuel of innovation. I don't know, but they're saying we want to deliver this ourselves. But designing that support, that facilitation support, in a modern way inside the application itself. So sort of in-app support, lots of use of video.
Okay. So almost needing to make sure you have facilitators, I guess is the best term for it, to be able to actually, you can't just throw people in there and they go, good luck, we'll see you on the other side. It's about how do you facilitate that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a great opportunity for L&D to control costs in that regard. If these L&D teams are delivering these experiences, I think they absolutely should be doing that. And there's a great development opportunity, I think, for we've seen one of our customers co-facilitate with a business leader and an L&D professional. And this is a great opportunity, for a development opportunity, which they came up with it, not us. So the business leader running these sims, there is a big facilitation skill, facilitating discussion and movement of people virtually. So there's a muscle building on that side, and indeed for that L&D person to really think about what the future is going to look like.
I think that's exciting, because I do see, going back to the point, a lot of people are struggling with what is my role in this new digital future? And when I look at it, I say, you still have a very important role. You're going to do things differently. You're definitely going to do things differently. Are you going to be standing in front of a classroom of 50 people? Probably not. Probably not anymore. Maybe, I don't know. But right. But that doesn't mean your facilitation skills, your ability to work people, help them understand, guide them through an experience, create those meaningful insights and pull those threads. That is still just as critical of a skill in the digital age as it was in the non-digital age, whatever fancy term you want to call it.
I agree, and it's really tactical, but just the confidence of getting the teams, breaking them out, putting them into Zoom, giving them access to Miro. I want you to do a quick key assumptions check, then come back in 15 minutes. Facilitating that, I make it sound easy. It's not easy. No. But being confident with the technology and performance consulting teams through technology, because you can't just get people on Zoom presentations now. You've got to move them around and get them to use technology. And simulation is just such a great platform to practice doing that and raise that awareness and motivation in those teams.
And so my follow-up question to that, and then I actually have a couple things I want to hit on, was, now if an organization has those resources, I agree. I think it's a huge digital upskilling opportunity for the L&D team. To me, I'm always looking for ways that we can optimize and help our L&D organizations grow and develop. And to me, that's huge. Let's build these digital 100%. Facilitation skills, because that is the new way of the world. And it doesn't. So I think that's huge. But for orgs who may not have those resources, C6 does have the capability to help do that. If let's say it's a small team, an intact team that says, we don't have a team that can run this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got 90 trained facilitators, globally. So that's definitely something that
it's a good clarification, because you'd hate for people to say, that sounds great, we don't have the resources.
No. We've definitely got, footprint here in Europe. Not as far as Asia Pac, if I'm honest, but absolutely. But we see a lot of L&D teams wanting to do it, because the technology is kind of slick. It's literally stop, start,
Yeah,
times.
this
It's
is
not
the
hard.
stuff, right? This is the stuff that so many in our
Yeah.
field got into the space for, was
And
to facilitate these experiences and to have see those aha moments and to help people grow and develop. That's why we got into it. So
and
I
there's
can
a
see why they gravitate towards it.
yeah, and there's a massive IKEA effect here, which is if you build the furniture yourself, you tend to love it a little bit more. I have some terrible examples of that. By the way, this table's, I don't know if this is my fine work, but for L&D teams, designing the simulation themselves, or certainly working with our team and writing that narrative, writing those themes, and then owning it, Christopher, right? Owning
Yeah.
it, and having that authorship on these things. So yes, it's a great digital upskilling opportunity for
Well,
sure.
and the other two things, I'm curious your take, because as I think, right, as we're closing up, I knew we'd run out of time. We could probably just keep going live for a while. But as I think about this, some of the challenges or just mindset shifts that we may have to make as practitioners on our side to maximize this capability. I just think about the fact that there's a huge opportunity for us to help our business stakeholders think about things in terms of the behaviors behind them, right? When I think of simulations and when I've worked with that and trying to design meaningful experiences, sometimes you have to help them think about it and actually break that down and actually take it from, we just have this big problem, we need it
Yeah,
fixed, we're calling an L&D to fix it, and actually taking the time to walk through that process and help them think differently about,
yeah,
well, what is the problem, let's talk about that, what's happening that we don't want to happen, what's not happening that we do want to happen. And to me, that goes back to our design conversation earlier, where we're saying that's how you're building this simulation, is
exactly.
through that dialogue, through that interaction of asking really good questions and understanding at the core where it's breaking down. And so that way you can design a solution that gets at the root of the problem, not the symptoms. And I think that's the risk you run into when you go after the symptoms solution.
Yeah, completely. And you can gamify that. We've done so much work looking at the way that business analytics teams work together, for example, and the questions that they formulate. And you can just build a frame. You can build a feature inside a sim, like an AI, just to get teams to think about business problem. What data do we need to make better decisions? Just gamifying that is so powerful. It's so powerful and simple to get these really important business issues like domain and analytics gaps, and gamifying them in simulation, raising people's awareness to it, and then saying, okay, and now here are the resources that you have available to you in the LXP, and suddenly you've generated a pull from that business team because they want to then go and start improving the way that they do, key assumptions checks, or
Yeah.
articulate right
Yeah.
hypotheses and things.
Well, Kevin brought up a really good question, and this was the next point I was actually going to make before we wrapped up, which Kevin was talking about the sore loser behavior, right? And I think this is an important point to make because it goes back to what we talked about before with simulation, where sometimes we've tried to design things that everybody can win, everybody
Yeah,
gets a trophy, and I will say that is something we have opportunity to grow and develop, is creating this culture of it's okay to fail. You're not always going to win. And that is going back to one of the challenges I think organizations sometimes need to think about as they're approaching this, is how are you getting in front of some of the change management behind that and making sure that you're
yeah,
setting clear expectations on that, because that fear of failure culture is real, and that can contribute to what Kevin brought up about the sore loser behavior, where whether it's sore loser or they're terrified to participate because they don't want to fail. It's about setting those expectations and making sure it's clear that this is a learning opportunity. This is a
yeah,
development opportunity. This is not performance management. This isn't, if you don't pass, you're out.
yeah,
This
exactly,
is growing
exactly.
and developing through sim.
Absolutely, and it's about creating memorable experiences. And I've bumped into leaders who I've worked with on Sims years later, and some were part of the winning team and some were part of the losing team. And both of them really remember the experience and remember the learning that it led to. So it's about creating memorable experiences, I think.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah.
it's such an important point. It's such an important point, and again, things that there's tremendous opportunity for the work we're doing, no matter where we are. So, like I said, I knew we would run out of time, but this has been really helpful, and I think a lot of people can walk away from this thinking differently about simulations and how are you using those to drive the behaviors that we want to see in the organization. And to me, I think it's very exciting what technology can do, because the way we've had to do this in the past, it was very difficult. It was time consuming. It was
Yeah.
resource intensive. And there were reasons that we a lot of times shied away from it. And now the capabilities there to do this with the speed and scale needed to move at the pace of business. So
Thanks, Christopher.
I
Really enjoyed
appreciate
it.
you joining me on the show. It's been great to get to know more about C6, and this was a great conversation. So thank you everybody who tuned in. Appreciate this. We'll be back on Friday, but thanks for the time. Thanks for being here, and hopefully you got something out of it.